Okay, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us this morning. We have Minister of Justice and Attorney General Bronwyn Eyre will be introducing the Economic Impact Assessment Tribunal and talking about the first case. So we'll have some opening remarks and then go to question. Minister Eyre.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome. Thank you to our guests for being here, whom we'll hear about and from momentarily. And I'll get to introductions right away. So just over a year ago, we announced the Saskatchewan First Act, which amended our own provincial constitution to entrench and reconfirm Saskatchewan's exclusive provincial jurisdiction over natural resources and power generation under Section 92A of the Constitution. That act came into force on September 15 of this year. And of course, flowing from the Saskatchewan First Act is the Economic Impact Assessment Tribunal, whose purpose and role is to determine, assess, and quantify the economic effects of federal policies and legislation on the people, businesses, and industries of our province. That impact, that harm, are real. And in the throne speech, we announced that we would initially be referring 3 sets of regulations to the tribunal: the federal clean electricity regulations, which we're officially referring today, proposed oil and gas caps, and the federal fuel standard. Other referrals may well be to come. There has been something of a tipping point and growing momentum of late when it comes to recognition of constitutional provincial jurisdiction, with 2 key recent decisions on federal provincial jurisdiction. One earlier this fall was the Supreme Court holding on the Federal Impact Assessment Act, aka Bill C-69. The other, just 2 weeks ago, was the federal court decision on the federal government's classification of all plastic manufactured items as toxic, equivalent to asbestos, mercury, and arsenic. Both courts held for the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces, and that the federal government had exercised far too broad an overreach into provincial jurisdiction. We were joined in the plastics case by Alberta, and on the Bill C-69 case by 7 other provinces, a strong symbol and signal to the jaded voices who would rather have us bow down and accept uneven treatment in this country, a double standard, and literally impossible expectations. Our efforts, starting with the Saskatchewan First Act last fall, on behalf of Saskatchewan people, have shown that resistance is never futile. The timing is right now. And when provinces speak up against what is always unilateral, never collaborative action by the federal government, things can change. And we're seeing that. It's always a matter of just do it, pay for it, or else. That can't go on. We're also seeing that against another backdrop: the carbon tax and the federal government's cynical carve-out of Atlantic Canada for political expediency. Weren't rebates supposed to cover the cost? That there is economic harm with the federal carbon tax is now being made painfully clear. And remember, it was Minister Stephen Guilbeault who said, quote, "How fair would it be for the rest of the Federation if we started carving out exceptions for provinces?" Our thoughts exactly. Today, along with the membership of the Economic Tribunal, we are also formally announcing that we will be referring the federal clean electricity regulations for first consideration to the Tribunal. Once we receive the Tribunal's report on the anticipated dollar figure impact of these regulations, we will decide as government how to proceed. And one strong possibility could be that we submit that finding as evidence in legal action in defense of and to protect Saskatchewan's autonomy, constitutional rights, and future economic prosperity. As you know, the clean electricity regulations mandate no fossil fuel generated power by 2035, which means no natural gas powered electricity, which means in Saskatchewan, the lights go out. The feds have not costed out any of this. And contrary to what they continue to suggest, Manitoba does not have enough hydro to export to us. And while our province continues to bring on more renewable power, it cannot safely bridge the gap from coal to potentially nuclear small modular reactor power by 2035, because small modular reactor power isn't expected to come online until the late 2030s. We believe that referring these regulations to the Economic Tribunal sends a strong signal, and we hope, by putting a dollar figure on the regulations' impact, will exert pressure on the federal government to fundamentally change and or pause the regulations. As the Globe and Mail's John Ivison wrote last week on Saskatchewan's efforts on the clean electricity regulations, quote, "No wonder the provinces most impacted are asserting their constitutional rights, particularly on a subject that is so existential to their survival as electricity prices." Members of the Independent Economic Tribunal, which include a chair and vice chair, have been appointed by a cabinet order in council to serve 3-year terms. And I'm very pleased to announce the following members. As chair, Michael Malani, KC, and you will hear from him momentarily. Mr. Malani is chair of the executive committee of the law firm McDougall-Gawley. He's a senior commercial and insolvency lawyer and partner with over 40 years of experience in practice. A former ST chair in business law at the University of Saskatchewan College of Law, a former president of the Law Society and Federation of Law Societies of Canada, and the current chair of the Law Reform Commission of Saskatchewan. In his legal capacity, Mr. Malani has undertaken various renewable energy projects for Sask Power, including negotiating power purchase agreements around wind and solar energy and agreements for the engineering, procurement, and construction of combined cycle gas plants. I know Mike to be highly effective, professional, and honorable, and I know he will serve the tribunal and the province very well. It is also a great pleasure for me to introduce as Vice Chair, Janice McKinnon, well known, of course, to this legislature and this province. Dr. McKinnon is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, member of the Order of Canada, and a former Saskatchewan Cabinet Minister. In 2017, she was appointed to the Federal Advisory Panel on NAFTA and the Environment. In 2019, she was appointed by former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney to chair the Blue Ribbon Panel on Alberta's finances. She is a professor of fiscal policy at the School of Public Health at the University of Saskatchewan and a senior fellow and member of the National Council at the C.D. Howe Institute. In one report, Alberta 2023 and Beyond, she and her co-authors clearly identified a key issue, quote, "A major challenge to the province is addressing federal government climate change policies. The federal government often acts unilaterally, does not represent or respect provincial jurisdiction, and establishes unrealistic and unachievable targets." Also being introduced today as part of the tribunal, Ken Fromm, who is, of course, also well known here. He is the former president and CEO of Sask Energy, former CEO of the Petroleum Technology Research Centre and of the Technical Safety Authority of Saskatchewan. He served as an officer and director of Raven Oil Corporation from 2012 to 2016, and before that, as president of Prairie Hunter Energy Corporation. A professional engineer, he also served from 2003 to 2004 as president of the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Saskatchewan. When I was Minister of Sask Energy, I found Ken to be the definition of a detail person, and I know that his wide breadth of energy sector knowledge and expertise will also serve this tribunal and the province very well. In retirement, he's also written about energy policy, including in one recent article comparing and contrasting Canada and Norway, and pointing out that while that country has pledged to cut carbon emissions to 55% below 1990 levels, it has also overseen an energy sector boom that continues to embrace new drilling at unprecedented levels, while companies operating in Norway expect production to rise well into this decade. So interesting contrasts. Dr. Stuart Smith, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, he's teaching a class at the U of S. He is a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. His research focuses on sustainability, agriculture, and innovation. He's published over 100 academic articles and is recognized as a leading expert on barriers to innovation and regulatory efficiency. He is also the Agri-Food Innovation and Sustainability Enhancement Chair at the University of Saskatchewan. As the federal government continues increasingly to set agriculture in its sights, Professor Smith has the expertise and depth to analyze those impacts. And finally, Estella Peterson. Estella is a heavy equipment operator in Fort McMurray, Alberta. In fact, she has to make a flight this afternoon to make sure that she gets back for her beginning of her shift. Originally from Saskatchewan and Treaty 4 Cowessess First Nation, Estella has been part of Suncor Energy's Aboriginal Ambassador Program. She has also written eloquently, including for the Globe and Mail, about the crucial economic importance of the natural resource sector to Indigenous communities. Her personal story is a poignant one, and her perspective on the economic benefits of the energy sector is an important one. She has written, quote, that according to an Environics poll, 65% of Indigenous people in Canada support natural resource development. Many First Nations want to work in Canada's oil and natural gas sector because of the long-term and well-paying career opportunities that it provides. Also that, quote, most Canadians and Indigenous people support Canadian energy because they know that the revenues it generates helps the entire country, paying for things such as new highways, affordable housing, hospitals, and schools. Estella offers a unique on-the-ground perspective, which will be of great value to the Tribunal's work. I'm extremely proud and honored that this fine, distinguished group has agreed to serve on the Economic Impact Assessment Tribunal. And on behalf of government and the Premier, who boldly set us down this path of Saskatchewan First, we are proud to establish it. No other Canadian jurisdiction, if I dare say, has such a clear, transparent process and path for assessing federal initiatives and their economic impact on provincial economies with autonomy legislation. No other province has an economic assessment tribunal. A strong Saskatchewan, as part of what must be truly cooperative federalism, means a strong Canada. And confirming Saskatchewan's place as part of cooperative federalism also means asserting our exclusive constitutional right to develop natural resources and power generation and grow our economy. So I would like to thank the tribunal members again for being here today, for their commitment to providing what will be an independent review of the impact of federal legislation and initiatives on Saskatchewan people, businesses, and the broader economy. Thank you, and I'll now turn things to Mike Malani.
Thanks very much, Minister Eyre. Good morning, everyone. As the Minister said, we'll be examining federal law or policy described in the legislation as federal initiatives. And we're doing so looking at the economic impacts. And that's an important feature in the sense that the tribunal has been tasked with something important but sufficiently narrow that we can provide appropriate information to the public and to the government. And the legislation also empowers the tribunal to make recommendations that can be considered by the government. And the types of matters we can consider are total investments, impacts on government revenue, expenditures and debt levels, net exports and imports, technological readiness. And as Minister Eyre indicated, the report will be submitted to the government, and it will be used as the government deems appropriate. And as chair of the tribunal, it's my responsibility to set the panels for each topic that comes before us. And so it might be all 5 people, or it may be less, depending upon the subject matter. And that will depend in part on the complexity and the expertise required. And so what is the tribunal really doing at its core? What it is doing is gathering information that we need to make our assessment. And that information can come from different sources. It may be conducting research studies. It may be interviews. It may be surveys. It will be reviewing data and information that has already been produced. It may be that industry representatives will be asked to provide submissions to us. And our goal is to ensure that our process is transparent and thorough and independent. We do not have a mandate to make any determination in any direction. We are tasked with looking at the consequences and providing information through our report. And I know in conversations with my fellow tribunal members that we're really looking forward to doing this on behalf of the people of Saskatchewan and to providing that independent review. I personally would like to thank the Lieutenant Governor and Council for giving me the opportunity to serve as chair. And Minister, I know we're eager to begin our work, so thank you again.
Thank you. And we'd be happy to take any questions.
What capacity is there for, I don't know who the rest is, but I guess I'll start with you, Minister, what capacity is there for an interchange of information with the federal government which seems to be across the problem right now, it's not having communication? If you can't speak from politician to politician, how does a tribunal more effectively deal with that particular issue to get to the end goal of offering solutions to problems?
Well, I guess first of all, the federal government will be invited to submit information that it feels is relevant. So that's baked right into the regulations, and so that will be something that, you know, they're not compelled to do, but certainly will be invited to do as a matter of course, right off the top. So, you know, we'll, as I say, that's part of the process. I guess just on the issue of, you know, picking up the phone, for lack of a better word, and in relationship with the federal government. I do frankly find that tiresome, that line that we somehow are not engaging. When you take, for example, the federal fuel standards, or for that matter, the clean electricity regulations. Let's start there. I mean, Sask Power, for one, has been extremely clear over a number of years about the realities that it is facing. And there have been countless letters, communications, and telephone calls, because I've been on them, at every level. And I mean, I recall very well speaking with Minister Wilkinson about the challenges of any number of these policies. But let's focus on these three, which we are referring to: the tribunal, clean electricity regulations, a federal fuel standard, and the oil and gas caps. Let's also keep in mind that these were unilaterally top-down announced. I mean, oil and gas caps, I think we had a few hours notice. It was announced at COP in Glasgow, and very quickly thereafter, Minister Wilkinson did media. Very quickly thereafter that, we spoke about it. But the problem is that these are, you know, being unilaterally imposed. The message very much is, do it, pay for it, and it will somehow miraculously fall into place. The federal government has not costed out these policies. And I've read what the federal government and Minister Wilkinson and Minister Guilbeault have said about these policies in great detail. If you look at the clean electricity regulations, there is no dollar figure impact. It's simply, it shall be done, it will be done. And that's a problem. And so I really do reject this idea that somehow we haven't made that clear at every level and in every format. We have. And before that, I spoke many times with Minister Wilkinson. I had a very nice relationship with him about the challenges of the federal fuel standard. Wrote him a letter, went to the, you know, talked about it in the media, talked to him about how I was going to be sending the letter, and so on. So it's been very clear. And I think for the federal government to suggest otherwise is misleading, frankly. And when they've known for months and for years what the challenges are with these policies.
I have a question too, I'll move to three. What is the budget for this, and what is the time frame for working with? There's considerable and extensive resource research that would be needed for this, that would be very consuming both in terms of tax dollars and time. So how going to work?
Right, well, so for this fiscal year, we're looking at about 150,000 for salary for operating costs, which we're absorbing. And going forward, we're estimating that operational costs for the tribunal will annualize at about 250,000 a year. Rates, just in terms of per diems and so on, are in line with other similar panels and tribunals across government, quasi-judicial and otherwise, including the rate review panels, remuneration and expense policy. So we've been very cautious about that and are going to certainly undertake and hope that things will be run as austerely and leanly as possible and using existing boardroom space and so on across government. So really this is a study tribunal and that's about research first and foremost, and Mr. Malani can speak to that further, but that's really the focus of it. It's a very, very narrow focus around research, and certainly go forward.
Thanks, Minister. And I would add that because there is so much good research out there, one of the benefits of this process is the avoidance of reinventing a wheel that doesn't need to be reinvented. And that doesn't mean we won't be taking in new information where appropriate. But in specific answer to your question, I'm confident that we can do our work in a cost-efficient and time-efficient way.
Minister, just a question for you. So at the end of the day, the government's just going to get a report. So how does this actually help the government?
Well, as I've said all along, and the tribunal, of course, is part of Saskatchewan First, and we've talked about that a number of times, so that the tribunal flows from the Saskatchewan First Act. The tribunal will submit its report, the dollar figure impact of said policy, so first the clean electricity regulations, which it will look at from all cost angles, and we then will consider the report and decide what to do with the information. And as we've signaled, that could, of course, include using it as evidence in legal action going forward, whether it would be a referral or a reference case, seeking an injunction and so on. And as I've spoken about before, one of the tests for an injunction is irreparable harm. And so in this case, potentially, if harm were identified around, dollar figure impact to the economy and the province, we could submit that as evidence of harm. So I think the main focus here really, and the importance of the work, is to cost out these policies. Because, as I've said, the federal government doesn't do it. And often when it starts to or attempts to, it's much more of a national look at cost, taking into account, for example, provinces with hydro, and not maybe zeroing in on specific provincial realities and specific provincial economic realities. So I think the value of the tribunal and the value to us will be to really get that economic impact sense and dollar figure sense of what we in Saskatchewan are facing. Not the West, not Alberta and Saskatchewan, but we in Saskatchewan, and not as part of the country, because we face such different realities.
Just to follow up on that, you've had finance officials come and provide costs on federal policies. We've had Sask come out last week and provide costs. So I don't understand how you need another report to tell you the costs when you have officials already giving you those costs.
Well, Sask has, in the case of the clean electricity regulations, it has provided costs from its perspective. And I think what's important is that more to the point, the tribunal looks at all angles. There are other angles to the clean electricity regulations. There are multiple angles to the coming oil and gas caps. The federal fuel standard, some of the positions that we've taken, even some of the cost outs that we have done or government has tried to undertake previously, are now getting older, 2 or 3 years back. And so things change massively in terms of market prices and global realities and national realities and economic realities. So I think the value is the snapshot of now, the snapshot of where we find ourselves now, not only from a Sask Power perspective, but from a broad economic perspective. And one of the issues that I think really we have to look at is the impact on the North. The impact on the North for the federal fuel standards, for the oil and gas caps, for the clean electricity regulations. There are a lot of trickle-down impacts from these federal policies that have not been economically canvassed or plumbed or completely analyzed or quantified. That is the purpose, and I think it serves all of us to get a full, comprehensive idea of what economic impact there is to these policies.
Are you all going to ask environmental groups to come and provide evidence?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Minister.
No, well, please. I mean, I'll just say, and certainly you can add, the focus has always been on the economic impact, the dollar figure impact of the policies. I think that, and Mr. Milani can speak further to that, I think in terms of tribunal's work, focus is incredibly important. And in this case, that focus, I think, will help the tribunal. I hope it will.
Thank you, Minister. I really don't have much to add on that other than to reiterate something I said at the start, and that is having a very collared-in objective will make this more successful. And the legislation and the Ordering Council makes it clear that it is the economic impact, the dollar amounts that we are to focus on. And that will guide the tribunal's work.
Just to follow up to that story, I know you're focusing on the economic. Some might say that, when you don't reduce emissions, that's going to have economic impacts in the future. Whether that's global warming or whatever. So is that going to be looked at, that the do nothing approach on emissions, and you have an economic impact from that? Will that be looked at at all?
Well, I guess I'll just say first, I think the do-nothing approach is not the case. And I mean, last week, when Minister Duncan presented on the submission to the federal government on the clean electricity regulations, he was very clear that the request of the federal government by Saskatchewan is to work with the clean electricity regulations to accommodate the more realistic 2050. The real issue here is 2035. And I read this morning that Minister Guilbeault is doubling down on that. So, the position is very much 2035. And so net zero by 2035, come what may, do what you have to do, we won't provide cost, you just, pay for it, which, as I say, is the opposite of collaboration. I mean, it is the definition of unilateralism. But the point is that we've always been clear that 2050 is much more realistic is for us, that's what we are working toward, that's what Sask Power is working toward, and that there are, reasonable, safe ways of bridging to 2050 where there are not reasonable, safe ways to bridging to 2035. And I think that really has been well plumbed. I mean, as I've said, as we've all said, coal transitions out, natural gas has to be the stopgap. And if you say no natural gas powered electricity by 2035, it is literally impossible to meet that. Sask Power has been clear on that, and speaking of engagement with the federal government, that has been made clear multiple times over multiple years in multiple ways. So it's not about an either or, it's about realistically and appropriately getting to a net zero of 2050 rather than 2035, given the power mix we have in this province, which again goes back to our unique mix and our unique circumstances. And I mean, speaking of collaboration, I mean, I'm always reminded of the methane example because it's a very good one. I mean, we worked with the federal government on methane. We reached an equivalency agreement with them. And within a few months of doing that, Minister Guilbeault publicly congratulated Saskatchewan for reducing methane by 50%. That was without any federal assistance. We did that on our own. So congratulated us publicly on reducing methane by 50%, obviously showed great environmental stewardship in that regard as a province. A few months later, few weeks later, I believe, just changed the rules of the game, made it 75%. So where is the collaboration? And in that case, we even had an equivalency agreement with them. We had worked with them on that. They still changed the rules of the game. So I would like to remind the federal government of that example as one, when they claim to be surprised that there is a degree of frustration about what collaboration means and what it should mean.
Just to build kind of on Jeremy's question, so are you going to include the effects of climate change on the economic total? So, for example, drought and wildfires have had lasting impacts on the economy here in Saskatchewan, and a lot of people tie them to climate change. So are you going to include that in those sort of economic totals?
Well, I think as I've said, I think the focus, first off, in referring the clean electricity regulations to the tribunal, the purpose of that is to consider the clean electricity regulations and the angles of economic impact of the clean electricity regulations. It isn't about, all of the above or multiple policies or even realities. It is about the economic impact of the clean electricity regulations on the province of Saskatchewan. And there's a lot to bite off there. And so to the point that Mr. Milani made, I think that focus is better. And where that leads in terms of the prism of clean electricity regulations will be up to the tribunal to determine. But I think that focus is now on those regulations, subsequently other regulations and policies of the federal government and their impact on the province. And as I say, including the North Indigenous communities in this province. They are significant.
And just one more question here. So a few of these individuals have ties to the oil, gas, and provincial government. Do you think that could cause a maybe harmful bias by any chance?
Absolutely not. I believe these individuals are esteemed, fine, distinguished, and extensively qualified, and will take their job as members of the independent tribunal very seriously. That I know and I think is very clear.
Do you think people of Saskatchewan will see it that way as well?
Yes, I do.
Why not someone with more of an environmental background, not challenging qualifications obviously, but if this is to achieve what I think you wanted to achieve, even under an economic basis, if you had someone that was more learned in terms of the specific environmental issues in play is discussed in terms of the possible economic and environmental impact, that would have avoided some of the criticisms, I think, because they're likely to land.
Well, I simply don't agree, Murray. I mean, I think that there's not a silo of environmental or economic in this case. I mean, if you look at the clean electricity regulations, I suppose that, to speak for the federal government, which I wouldn't want to, their goal, I suppose, is environmental, but at the massive detriment of the economy. They have a massive economic impact. And it's not to say that we aren't going down the road of net zero in any case. So again, I don't think it's an either or. I think the reality is that certainly the individuals on this panel have all cross-referenced economic and environmental considerations in past work. That is for sure. And they are not, either as individuals and as experts in considering this, or the actual issues themselves to be viewed in a silo of one thing or the other. There are cross-references. And that's why I believe, certainly based on the qualifications, they are more than ably able to cross-reference those multiple angles to the issues that they are considering and the federal policies that they are considering. But the clean electricity regulations, again, as one example, have certain goals which are unachievable for Saskatchewan. What is the economic impact of that? There are also, of course, environmental considerations to all of this. And as I say, the key really here, I think, is the cross-referencing.
Was there any thought in terms of making recommendations from the town of more binding? I get that no government wants to relinquish authority in terms of the ultimate decision-making process, but it seems to me that you don't like what they're going to say, who knows, you don't have to pay so much attention to them, and we might be back into where we are right now, which is in essence a political route on this issue. If we want to
Well, I think it's important as fact-finding. And I think that, I mean, we've always been clear about, what we will do with the information, in the sense that we will obviously consider, further legal action. We will consider, simply using it as an awareness-raising tool, because I honestly feel that there is a great hunger for facts. There is a great hunger for facts. There is a great hunger for real analysis of what some of these policies mean in an economic context for families, for businesses, for our industries, and for Canadians. And I think we're beginning to see that more and more, that you cannot simply unilaterally, top-down, impose policies without discussing cost.
So will you be envision a situation where you might say, I don't like the recommendations of this government, we're not following?
Well, I know that we will pay detailed attention to the recommendations, because the work is so important. The work is so important to establish dollar figure impact of the policies. And I know that we will analyze and review and consider the recommendations in great detail, because it's information that we need, it's information that the province needs, and it's information that the country needs. It's information that the federal government needs. We are at the moment in a bit of a vortex when it comes to facts. Oil and gas caps, what does that mean? Well, it's about emission reduction, but what does it mean? Whom will it impact? Are companies, in anticipation of some of these policies, not exploring as much, not doing as much? Absolutely yes. It's creating investor uncertainty. It is creating broader uncertainty. But we need to get a sense, a nuanced, detailed sense of what these policies mean for the economy of Saskatchewan and the people of Saskatchewan. Because right now, I mean, going back to my methane point, there are top-down impositions of data from the federal government. They won't share their data with us. And I've said this many times. They change the rules, make it suddenly a 75% reduction unilaterally over a 50% one, and then don't share their data. How is that collaborative? And so we need as a province, and I believe we need as provinces, to begin to say, this isn't collaborative, and we need to establish our own fact base. And so I can tell you that when the tribunal comes back with their report, I, for one, will be panning through it with a fine-tooth comb, because I think it will be genuinely helpful to put in context and perspective what we are dealing with as a province and as an economy.
Could I add something?
Absolutely.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think what we're doing is we're trying to adjust the balance here, because there's a lot of information about the environmental impacts of various things, the fires, the environmental impacts of new legislation. Fair enough. But there's another piece of the puzzle that has to be out there. If these policies are put in place, what will the economic impact be? And what we will provide is just another piece of the pie. We're not giving the final answer, but this is a piece of the pie that Canadians need to know. People in Saskatchewan need to know, well, how's that going to affect my life? What's going to happen with my job or my taxes or my energy? And so that's what I see our role as. And I think what I really like about it, it's so targeted, it's specific. We're going to provide people with an essential part of the puzzle of the way forward, and it'll balance the amount of material that we have on the environmental side. And I don't think that any responsible government should accept a policy without looking at the economic impacts of what the impact is going to be on the people of the province.
Yes, j'imagine qu'une fois les rapports faits sur présentés au fédéral, est-ce qu'ensuite l'objectif c'est d'avoir plus de subventions selon les coûts présentés, avoir plus de temps pour atteindre les objectifs? Quel est l'objectif une fois que les rapports faits et présentés à Ottawa ou seulement les présenter dans votre place?
on va réserver le droit de considérer les recommandations et après de considérer, par exemple, si on a l'opportunité de décider à faire quelque chose sur le chemin légal ou de considérer les recommandations comme information. Très, très important pour nous donner le pouvoir de l'information. Ça, c'est le but.
Et vous l'avez répondu en anglais, mais juste dire pourquoi créer un tribunal pour faire ça, mais pas utiliser les ressources qui existent déjà au sein du gouvernement?
Parce qu'ils vont explorer, les membres du tribunal vont explorer les autres angles. Il y a beaucoup d'angles, il y a beaucoup de niveaux, il y a beaucoup de contextes, il y a beaucoup de perspectives économiques qui sont très, très importantes. Et ils vont offrir cette nuance.
Est-ce qu'on va avoir un petit peu plus de détails sur comment ces gens-là ont été choisis? Il y en a qui sont en dehors de la province. Pourquoi est-ce qu'eux, ils ont pu être plus qualifiés que ceux en province?
J'ai fait un revue de leurs qualifications. Et leurs qualifications sont exemplaires.
Et vous avez mentionné tantôt le coût, mais pas le délai. C'est notamment pour le règlement de l'énergie propre. On a-tu un délai de quand le rapport va être sorti?
Ça, c'est tout dans les régulations. Oui.
When is this tribunal going to come out with this report?
So the current plan is that it will be convened now within 90 days. And the date, I believe, is May 15.
Minister, what happens to the tribunal with Sask First Act if there's a change at the federal government level?
Well, I think the information about the policies remains incredibly important. The fact that to Dr. McKinnon's point that it is an incredibly important part of the puzzle, of the perspective of the overall picture to consider the economic impact. In terms of, for example, I suppose if the clean electricity regulations were to be no more at some point down the road, I mean, that would be a bridge we would have to cross. But I think in the meantime, it's incredibly important as the federal government continues to double down on the 2035 date, and as our position has been that is, literally unworkable, that we establish what we are really confronting. And we hope, as one part of this, to impart that and to be clear about the detailed cost breakdown of what we are facing. I would hope that the federal government would be interested in that too, aside from saying it's doable, which is all I ever read. I think that facts matter. People have a hunger for the real facts, and rightfully so when it's the economy and their jobs at stake. So I think it's important in any case. Federal fuel standard, is already on the books. So it already has an impact. It's been gazetted. It's carbon tax number 2, and that impact is something that will also be eventually considered. But there's impact right now, and I think the anticipation of impact has its own effect, and I think that's something that one should be aware of in some of this work as well.
Might Dr. McKinnon be willing to offer some advice on province finances given our current situation?
No, that's not a part. That's not why I'm here today.
Will this report be made public?
Yes. Yes.
And once this tribunal is done, will there be another one?
Well, these fine people have been appointed for 3 years, and so they have a term of 3 years which can be renewed. We'll see where things are at, to Adam's question and otherwise, in terms of the policies and the state of the policies. But the idea is that, as we had indicated in the throne speech, that this will be the first referral, that we will then be making further referrals, and the other 2 that have been explicitly mentioned or referenced have been oil and gas cap and the federal fuel standard. That's not to say that there couldn't be others as well, potentially in the sustainable ag space and other areas. So it's ongoing work.
So unfortunately, we'll be strictly on energy.
That's right, yeah. And then the subsequent referral will be made a little bit later with a slightly later date.
And submissions, like no one's being forced to participate, it's requesting on a volunteer basis.
The legislation does allow the tribunal the power to call witnesses, and I can tell you that these are early days. We haven't yet formulated what the rules and the process we will follow as we undertake our work. But again, the hallmarks of what we want to achieve are transparency and efficiency, both in terms of time and dollars. And I think that will let us really get a good handle on what sort of information will come in and from what sources. And as Minister Eyre indicated, the federal government will be invited to participate. They'll be given notice within 7 days of the tribunal receiving this referral. And if the goal is to obtain the best and most complete information possible, I would think as chair that we would want that from all places and all quarters. And as Minister said, it may well be that the federal government will provide us with additional information and details so that the report will be the most complete and accurate that we're able to create.
For the interview process, sir, I was just assuming that what you would be mostly dealing with was would be written submissions.
Mr. Mandrick, I think you're right. I think in the first instance, our expectation is that most of the information will come from written submissions, either those that have been created or that may be created. But because we want our work to be as complete as possible, the ability to ask for input by way of interviews or otherwise, I think is a very important part of what we're able to do.
Okay, so my next question, will it be public?
So the process under the legislation allows, both in terms of oral evidence and written documents, the possibility of confidential business information being held back or redacted. And like any other process, to get the best information, one has to be respectful of the people providing the information. And so, Mr. Mandrick, it's early days, but we're alive to those issues and we'll be thinking it through as we develop our process.
Just for clarity, will it be like court, where if witnesses are called, they have to go?
As a lawyer, I hope not. No, I'm being facetious. That's a very good question. There is actually power given to us to compel attendance. The present view is that is very unlikely, given how we will be able to obtain the information from other sources.
Have you, the legislature, if you're like being called bar, the legislature is, say, it's part of the act?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mandrick, would you repeat the question?
Well, it's not done very often, but legislatures have the power to call witnesses in certain circumstances.
Yes.
I feel awkward telling you why, but I can't.
Yeah,
But like, would it be that kind of format if that's what what I'm getting at is going to be under legislation?
Yeah, in fact, because the enabling legislation specifically provides for the power to compel witnesses and also refers to the Public Inquiries Act, the commission itself could have its own process to require a witness to attend, in theory. So it wouldn't be through the legislature, but rather the power descends through the act that appoints the tribunal, and the powers are set out in the legislation and the regulations.
But who and where is way down the river, I think?
Yeah, very much, if at all, Mr. Mandrick, if at all. That's a fair description.
And where will the tribunal be conducting its meetings?
So in the aim of efficiency, we have Teams meetings and we have Zoom and we have other vehicles. Yesterday, the tribunal members assembled for the first time. Some of us had never met before, and some of us, we go back a half a century. And so with that in mind, as we develop our process and procedure, there may be in-person meetings, there may be proceedings by way of other media, imperfect, but much more cost-efficient.
And it will be under the umbrella of justice, right? So there'll be an operational side to it. It's not formally called a secretariat, but it'll manage the research requests, the operations side of it will be through the Ministry of Justice. And again, I think, and Mr. Malani has well explained this, I mean, the idea is not on the public inquiry side, if that helps. It's to prepare a report. It's a study tribunal. It's based around research, and it will invite experts and stakeholders and so on.
Perfect, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.